we were able to essentially take Reaper parts out of stock rooms and build the first aircraft. I mean, the first CCA is in assembly right now as we speak in a building.
Oh,
So,
wow.
the speed at which you get contract award and it's announced to the speed of them getting an airplane is well inside 24 months, if not inside 1 year.
All players, low down, active, bullseye, 1327, for tactical. Lights on.
All right, we're live. Welcome to The Merge, where we make sense of defense in an enjoyable way. The show is really just an extension of our weekly newsletter. It's free. It's awesome. You should sign up. The link is in the show notes, themerge.co. That's C-O. Okay, admin's complete. I'm your host, Mike Benitez. Today, we have a special episode. We are honored to have reps from the two winning companies of the Air Force's Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program. Before we dive into that conversation, we're going to take a moment to understand a little bit about what's going on with that program. And so here's some context. So the Collaborative Combat Aircraft, CCAs, they're a subset of our ACPs, Autonomous Collaborative Platforms. And those are just like other aerial missions like refueling, mobility, ISR, things like that. So CCAs are the fighter-like variants of ACPs. At its core, the program is focused on the development of unmanned combat aircraft that can operate autonomously or in conjunction with manned fighters to perform counter-air mission. That's the first use case. So think beyond visual range air-to-air combat, like an F-22. Okay, the Air Force right now plans to buy about 100 or so in the first increment of CCAs over the next few years, but the overall goal is to scale to over 1,000 CCAs, prioritizing cost-effective scalability. How to get the scale on that timeline and how it's going to all operate and integrate in the force. Those are the things we're going to dig into today. Today's guests represent the two companies that have been selected to build the first production representative CCAs for the Air Force. From a business standpoint, they are competitors. But today we're going to set it aside because from a national security standpoint, they are allies and we're all allies. And they're going to help us talk about CCAs today and help us make sense of what's going on in this groundbreaking program. Okay, without further ado, let's introduce our esteemed guests from Anduril and General Atomics. First up, we have Zim Salman, Vice President of Air Dominance and Strike at Anduril. Welcome, Zim.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And then we have from General Atomics, Mike Atwood, Vice President for Advanced Programs. Welcome both to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, well, this is the first time I've actually had more than one company on, and actually it's the first time either one of you guys have been on the show. So before we dive into CCAs, I think it is actually pretty useful to find out a little bit the backgrounds of the companies, because your corporate structures and your capture strategies have really gotten you to where you're at this program. And so I don't want to hand wave the business side of it. And so if you want to start with Anduril, and then we can go to General Atomics, kind of where you guys are at and how you're structured and what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit about Anduril. We were established in 2017, so a 7-year-old company based out of Southern California. And really since the founding, the goal has been to be a defense technology company, which is how do you live in that nexus between commercial tech and kind of your traditional defense companies and the US military. The goal is obviously to bring kind of the best commercial tech available out there in the market and bring it to bear on kind of the harder US government problems, specifically for DoD. Less so about, how do we come up with a commercial product that could potentially be used for DoD? So not looking for dual use applications, but really like how do we focus in on the harder problems that the military is dealing with, and how do we bring kind of the best tech, the best approaches and processes to help them solve through that? Despite the topic of today, we actually are a software company. So our core product is Lattice, which is a software platform. Think about it as how do we operate a scalable number of autonomous robots in a more denied and complex environment. So it's Anduril in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get the software later on in this episode because it definitely plays a role. Mike, tell us about General Atomics. It's been around for over 50 years, which I did not realize until I was actually looking up the background of the company. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I've been here a little over 20 years, so I've kind of grown up with the Predator and Reaper, and it's been a wild journey. So started with the Blue family acquiring General Atomics was an energy company, and then deciding they wanted to get into unmanned airplanes. They felt that there was a compelling need. And back in the mid 90s, kind of gave birth on a DARPA ACD program to the idea of a robotic data linked airplane. And really 9/11 happened. I think that was the big turning point in the company in which we weaponized and put, active munitions on a beyond line of sight controlled robot. And then it kind of grew from there. It's been exciting. I think we've been fortunate to make more weaponized UAVs than anybody else out there. I think what's interesting about the CCA competition relative to the two companies is we're both privately held. General Atomics still remains as a privately held company, in Anduril, the VC and private backing. It provides a very unique acquisition landscape for what's to come in the coming years. And I think that is a different point and a point of inflection for the government.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I had picked up on that same opportunity as well. Because your corporate structure is not public, you have a little more freedom as far as prioritization, resource allocation, forecasting needs, investments ahead of need, things like that, to position yourselves to capture opportunities when they present themselves. So a little bit of predicting the future, but you're also placing bets of where going to skate to where the puck's going to be. Okay, let's talk about CCA 101. So I kind of introed what the CCAs are, but I'd actually like to hear from you guys. So in your own words, what are CCAs and why is this program so important? Not really from your company, but from, let's call it the Department of Defense's perspective. As you guys know, this program is one of Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall's pet projects. He talks about it all the time. So I'd really like to hear your perspective on how you view this program in the context for the Department of Defense.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the lead there. I mean, being around unmanned airplane almost my entire professional working life, there was a lot of ISR, a lot of pattern of life, a lot of CENTCOM, and a lot of work in that. And I think there was a big hole in the peer level fight in air-to-air kill chains. There really wasn't a Top Gun Maverick airplane that we had invested in. We really focused on the fighter pilot community. I think as that conflict began to scale to not just narrow BVR kill chains, but wide area kill chains and kill webs, there was a need for many on many. And I think, back in Will Roper's time, to predate Secretary Kendall, there was this idea of autonomous collaborative platforms. It was a family, it was a heterogeneous mix of different capabilities. I think as Secretary Kendall came into play, he really wanted to focus on that air dominance piece of it. And so inside of autonomous collaborative platforms, we find ourselves with collaborative combat aircraft, which to your lead in, which I think was spot on, it's really about air dominance and air-to-air kill chains, because that's one of the missing elements in a peer fight. I think on that journey, both Anduril and General Atomics have been moving around with what is the specific mission, what are the specific data links, weapons, ranges, all that kind of stuff. I think we finally have a really good aim point from the Air Force on that. And I think we're aligned and we're rowing the boat pretty hard to give them something very quickly.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Maybe to add a little bit more and kind of higher level view, a prime example of what it takes to modernize quickly. And when we talk about implementing the NDS, right, and what it's going to take to actually change combat capability in a way that addresses near peer, this is a prime example of doing things quickly, doing things differently. It is a first in class, right? So many of our modernization programs is the next of something. It's just the same concept, but a little bit longer range, a little bit better technology. This is truly a first in class from a warfighting capability perspective, from a technology perspective. I mean, it's going to be an autonomous air vehicle, right? So that'll be really interesting. And then just on acquisition, I think there's actually a lot that was done there that was truly unique, from setting up an acquisition strategy, how we work with the warfighters, how we're working with the government counterparts. It's the
we're going to dig into that. Don't worry. We're going to dig into that. It'll make Lieutenant General Dale White very happy to hear.
It's a great leading case study of what it takes to make change in the department.
What we won't do today, we're not going to talk the specifics of your designs, but we can say directionally that they are variation derivatives of the things that you've seen in public. So you have the Fury from Anduril, and you have the OBSS, which is the X-67A from General Atomics. What I think is interesting is those two have almost opposite designs because of how they were incepted and created. And so the X-67 from Mike, your company's platform, kind of really grew up in the OBSS program, which was offboard sensing, so forward sensing. So again, long range kill chains, but maybe not the kinematics. And Fury was created. Most people may not remember this. AFRL's Bandit project, which was originally an unmanned adversary air vehicle. So a fighter to go up and train against. And so it didn't have to have some of the operational aspects of it, but it was really focused on multiple mission training sets and things like that. You see turn patterns at a fighter base. So slightly different origin stories, and they're kind of triangulating on, hey, if we put both of these together, what does this thing look like?
You're hitting the philosophy right. I mean, I think people think that Anduril and us are in competition. I think we're really complements. I think though we come from this era of private backing, they're starting with the Bandit, which was essentially adversary air and target drones, and we're starting with Reaper and coming down. And I think you kind of have this bracketing of the capability of the cost point that'll be really interesting in the defense strategy. I think there's enough commonality that the taxpayer is only investing in this kind of once, but they're almost getting, two cars out of it. It's somewhat like, Tesla. You kind of have this skateboard. You have this core chassis, this core suite of technologies, and you'll get, the SUV from it, and you'll get the sedan from it, and you'll give that user experience to the combatant commands that gives them kind of two different ways to implement the platform. And then, as Zim brought up, software is a huge part of this, right? And so unifying the brain across the two bodies, much like autopilot on Tesla, I think is transformational. As she brought up, a lot of this isn't just about the widgets and the carbon fiber and the jet engines. It's about the acquisition to deliver something inside 2-year time horizons, which is unprecedented in the Department of Defense.
Double tap on that. Schedule was key, right? So a lot of this was, what's available now and what can we get now, instead of highly optimizing a platform that's going to take us 10 years, right? So I think that's where you get a lot of it. And the Air Force is generally going to benefit. They're going to have, two very complementary capabilities that they'll be able to kind of procure and scale, and yeah, everybody wins.
Win-win. I love it. All right, let's talk software real quick, because Mike, you alluded to it just a second ago, and Zim, you mentioned it early on. You're a software company first, and then hardware is your enablers. So the CCA program, it's not just about creating these low-cost unmanned aircraft. It's giving them the intelligence to go enable them to do the things. And when you look at across the spectrum of use cases, counter air, it can be very, very dynamic depending on what you're doing. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how you both are viewing the importance of the software aspect of the program. And I know that a lot of that's not as public as the platform part. So as far as vendors and contracts and things like that, we'll stiff arm those details today. But just from the aspects from the software, I'm curious on both of your insights.
Maybe I'll take a first crack at this. So the software part's going to be the hardest, right? We've built airplanes before. So I think there's a large community out there that knows how to do that and what it's supposed to look like. How you field autonomous vehicles is completely different. So there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of open questions that we need to do. And I think that's both on the development side for the software companies, but also from the warfighter perspective in terms of how do we want to operate with and field actual autonomous robots, which will be an interesting challenge. It's going to be shared learning, right? Like, I think that's the only way we're going to get there. I think the one upside to this is that there's so much work that's been done on the commercial side that we can really learn from and leverage, whether that's self-driving cars or kind of the work that other companies are doing, that whether that's Shield or Anduril or EpiSci, some other companies out there doing great work that's gotten a great head start on the technical side. So it's really just kind of bringing it all together.
Yeah, and Mike, you people may not realize, but General Atomics has been doing autonomy. You've had a lot of self-funded autonomy projects in the company over the past 5 years or so. So you probably have a just as a well-rounded insight from a perspective from General Atomics being kind of software and hardware, right?
And I think me personally, I have an even more unique perspective. I grew up in Palo Alto. I grew up in Silicon Valley. I was kind of formed by that entrepreneurial Internet of Things, connect things together, the power of software. So I'm going to kind of push back a little bit on Zim here a little bit. I mean, the ecosystem that General Atomics has been an autonomous platform for some time. I think there is an ability to scale that because of manpower that has held back the Air Force from really reaching the combat mass. So much of what we did in CENTCOM was tactical weaponeering that required a human as the ROE, the rules of engagement. What we're seeing now are kill chains where we're willing culturally to take that ROE and put it in the hands of a machine, which I think is the transformation in autonomy. It's about trust in autonomy. That's this tipping point. And GA was very fortunate about 2 years ago to be one of the prime performers on Skyborg, which was the first real dose of a life cycle material command, performing a large force exercise, and then fielding the first autonomous brain. And I think, to Zim's point, the Air Force had never done that before. They had never figured out the life cycle, the DevSecOps, the continuous integration and continuous development. And they had this wake up moment at the end of Skyborg that what SPO, the System Program Office, is going to run autonomy. And that kind of broke them. Like, they had this thing that had born from CENTCOM and Reaper and Global Hawks and all kinds of other toys out there, but it had no one to operationalize it to the level that you would trust it. There was always a human over the loop, right? On the loop, over the loop. I think Anduril's got some really interesting perspective with Lattice about how you blend the human element with the machine element for higher levels of trust and situational awareness, right? And that's the change in truly autonomous versus autonomy or automation. And I think that is one of the big stepping points in CCA, is the trust of that brain with the right amount of human element in a forward, highly critical, very constrained ROE fight.
Pull a thread on a couple of things you said. So the trust. So when you think about like the Middle East, so you have a 4-star general in the Middle East, and I think everyone's heard stories before in Iraq and Afghanistan where the 1,000-mile screwdriver. So the 4-star is watching video feeds and authorizing strikes on a case by case basis because he can, right?
From a Reaper, by the way.
Yeah, there you go, from a Reaper. Well, then you get to the point where operations start to intensify both geographically and in nature. And now that one 4-star, he physically can't make those decisions as one person. And so he's forced to delegate, not because he trusts, because he has to, right? If you want to win, you have to delegate something down the chain. And when you look at the problem that the Air Force has, where if you look at just from the fighter perspective, it's, the smallest and oldest it's ever been. And buying more manned aircraft is not how you fix that. You have to jump to an entirely new paradigm, which the AI or the autonomy enabled by low-cost scaled production of aircraft that have shorter lifespans, putting all that together is what the Air Force is kind of betting the future on. If we can make this work, we can actually jump to a new paradigm, restore deterrence in the next few years, and then it'll buy us time to basically do all the other things we need to do to modernize the force. So trust and the delegation of necessity, I think, is a really big part of this program. And you can delegate without trusting, but eventually you have to be able to trust it in parallel. Otherwise, you're just going to rescind all that and it's not going to stick.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we've been doing with our MQ-20 Avenger platform is building that trust with the Air Force. I think, that's been flying for over 4 years, flying these autonomy cores that we all talk about. I think now it's time to get off the knitter, the Nevada test and training range, and get this thing downrange, right? We need some combat evaluations to figure out, almost from a policy or a cultural standpoint, do we trust it? The good news for the taxpayer is the technology is here. Whether it's coming from Anduril, whether it's coming from General Atomics, we have the tech. It's just a matter of how we trust and implement the tech.
And you just have to fly it, right? Like, you just got to get out there. People need to have experience interacting with it, and that's how you build trust. And I don't know if you're going to get around that. So I think part of this is really just training and as much fielding and deployment as possible to get people used to it.
Yeah, the operator touch points is a key, because doctrine, tactics, integration, all what we call the DOTMLPF-P stuff, like how we actually bring it into the force, care and feeding, that is a whole separate wicked problems that need to be worked in parallel with putting this technology together. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But back to the point about trust, and the first C in CCA is collaborative. So it's not just the aircraft collaborating with themselves, but that synergy of putting the manned and unmanned together as a team, the man-on-man teaming. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, and I know with Lattice and how you think about battle management and mics and some of the ways that General Atomics has thought through integrating man and machine. Where do you guys see the kind of a starting point? Where do you think it's going to be going?
I think the best way to think about this and the best way to really kind of roll this stuff out is just start with an MVP. Like, what is the bare minimum that you need to be able to do with CCAs? Does the man quarterback need to be able to achieve with CCAs? And you start with that and you prove out that you can do it and it's predictable and understandable, and you can then add more complex behaviors. It's no different than training, right? Like, you just got to get used to operating with it. So I think you start simple, you make it do the thing that it's supposed to do and make sure it adds value. And then over time, you can make it either more autonomous or more complex. But it's really it needs to be a shared journey really with the operators and how they want to interact with the machines. So.
Yeah, I've had a personal experience with this. So, I'm a private pilot and I know how to, operate a basic airplane. And, we started with Air Combat Command with tablets, right? There was this idea that they wanted to have this discrete control and they wanted heading, speed, altitude control. And I got to fly in one of these jets with a tablet, and it was really hard to fly the airplane, let alone the weapon system of my primary airplane, and spatially and temporally think about this other thing. And I actually learned from that experience, that was all part of Skyborg. We actually need to make it a lot more complicated out of the gate. We got to make the collaborative part of the aircraft essentially sense or know the intent of what the fighter's trying to do. If he's trying to ingress, if he's trying to egress, if he's trying to shoot, if he's trying to jam, if he's trying to be in MCON, be an organic extension of whatever that function is that they're trying to do without burdening the pilot. I use this term like we want to be like this flying picnic table. We just want to be his sensor, but 60 miles forward. We want to be his weapon, but twice as far. We want to be his, and it just to have it be organic, that the triangles and diamonds on his screen are just better. And he doesn't even have to worry about gas and weapons and range and turn rate and altitude deconfliction. It's just organic. So I think GA has taken maybe a different stance than Anduril here. We're really focused on a lot of closed loop, self-aware, cognitive autonomy. Because when we did it simply and we did the training, it didn't work.
Without getting to the specifics, right? So I think there's a pretty big delta between heading, speed, altitude, and kind of an MVP of an autonomous system. One of the things that I think in general we will all have to figure out is, how does this iterate over time? The first instantiation of this is not the actual how it's going to be used in the long run. So it's really one of the things that we will have to figure out is, what's V1 versus like V10, and what are you adding or changing over time? And part of that, learning the process and learning how you actually evolve both the tech and the understanding of that tech with the operator community will be a big part of the challenge.
That's actually a really good segue, because Zim, you alluded to it early on. How this program is structured and organized is just as, I think, paradigm changing than just the technology and the problem you're trying to solve at the operational level. So for people who aren't aware, this program exists in a consortium of industry, and this consortium with the Air Force and industry meets often, and they talk about all of these things that we're just kind of talking about, different views of the world, different experiences, and knowing that, hey, no one person in the room actually has the answer, but we all have pieces of this puzzle, and we're going to keep putting these pieces in play and figure out how the pieces fit together. And to your point, like, whatever fields first with General Atomics and Anduril, 100% chance that it's going to change.
Yeah.
So, but the license to learn, I think, is one of the groundbreaking parts of this program. There's a lot of off ramps and on ramps and industry days being top of mind recently. Yeah. So what has your experience been in this kind of consortium and actually talking with the customer?
We've been kind of in the space and really kind of shaping and talking about it for a while. And I think, cards on the table, when we were first kind of talking about and they were first considering consortiums, we were like, ugh, like, it's really, you're just going to slow everything down, and it's going to be like, it's just, we've seen this before, it's going to be difficult. And it is harder, it is slightly slower, but I think the way they structured it is correct, right? In terms of things that you need consensus on and kind of cooperation on across the marketplace versus things that, individual companies should be doing. And I think they're being very reasonable And I actually think we've all benefited. We went in as skeptics and it's been actually great collaborating and learning from some of the other vendors who have very different perspectives. I think there isn't one way to solve kind of these hard problems, and I think everyone brings in a different level of expertise that we're all learning from.
I think one of the secret sauces of this consortium, unlike other consortiums which are a little more general and enduring, this one was formed for a very specific reason, and it brought the people who had those experiences and insights into the consortium for that specific reason. And so I think the North Star, I think, is one of the powers of the concept for this consortium.
Yeah, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? It's that saying. I think the customer has found kind of a Goldilocks between those two extremes. I think this is something that needs to go far. It needs to be transformational. It needs to onboard a life cycle of software. So I think they were kind of forced in some way to bring the conversation together, right? There were a lot of adjunct programs happening in silos to go fast. The Venom program, some OSD programs, the Skyborg program, everyone was going alone. And I think what the consortium did is it brought everyone to the table and said, now's the moment. You've gone fast apart. Now let's go far together. And then they created a construct where it was everyone show up and add value. Don't fight with each other. Be what you're the best at and bring that version of yourself. And if you're going to fight for somebody else's rice bowl, you're kicked off the island, right? Just show up and do what you do well. And if you're best of breed, you'll be treated fairly in the consortium. And I can say that, whether it's an engine vendor, a payload vendor, an airframe vendor, I think the US, industrial base has really come together in a way to get this far vision, but on a speed to ramp that makes sense for the conflict scenarios that we're looking at. So, I applaud them doing the consortium. It's the harder road, right? It's the more varsity road. And somehow they've balanced that to the point where they haven't shed too much speed from it.
Yeah, and I just want to double tap what you said about the industry. I think when you think of efficiency and resiliency, those are generally thought of kind of two sides of the same coin. You can either be efficient or you can be inefficient and be very resilient. By bringing in all these different vendors, we have all these on-ramps and off-ramps. You do lose some fiscal efficiency in the near term, but I would argue you create unquantifiable long-term efficiency because you're going to drive a better product for the warfighter at the expense of some of that near-term fiscal efficiencies. And that's going to give you a stronger industrial base, a stronger solution. You're going to have this, again, the off-ramps and on-ramps. There is an inherent resiliency that comes with the structure that you cannot foot stomp that enough. Like having these programs, these massive programs where you down select, you pick your once in a generation winner, you basically atrophy that entire market because only one person has a contract that endures through, the next sometimes 70 years, right? So I am a big fan of it. We'll see what happens in the next few years if the Air Force can maintain this. And I'm really curious to see what the Navy and Marine Corps kind of, they're looking around the corner at the Air Force right now, seeing how it's going. So I give it another year or two, and I think we'll see some interesting things happen there.
And it's easy for us to say kind of in the winner circle on the first thing, maybe the perspective of the people that are a little bit on the outside looking in, you'd get a different answer. But I feel that both Anduril and Jay are well poised to bring a world-class team to deliver something relevant on a relevant timescale.
Being in the winner circle right now, I mean, you can't have a groundbreaking program without groundbreaking challenges, right? Or opportunities. I mean, if it was easy, we've already done it. So what do you guys think is some of the challenges, whether fielding CCAs in the battle space or just from a performer perspective, like, hey, now we have to go build these vehicles at whatever this price point and deliver it with the bottles and that kind of fidelity. What do you guys think are the challenges and opportunities here?
I'll go first.
For me, I've been doing this, I'll call it ACP thing for almost a decade now. And I think the challenge was, you kind of hit on it, the cost. We started with an X-47, X-45. They were bald eagles. And we're like, wow, that doesn't meet many on many in mass. And it was a little ahead of its time on autonomy. So we swung the pendulum over to the XQ-58 Valkyrie, the Kratos product. And that was a little too small. The rados, the parachutes, there was a little bit of operational tail that we didn't expect. And we went a little too small. And in the middle of that, we've kind of honed in on this size class that is more utilitarian. And I think the challenge has been finding the right balance of cost, survivability, and mission system capability. And that kind of OODA loop that we've been stuck in, I think the Air Force finally found the right balance of all those. So the challenge was a system level optimization of all of those attributes, but it took 6 years to find that optimum point. The challenge now is delivering on something that has that optimization point that hasn't been built before. How do we not lose costs? How do we keep survivability? And how do we balance that? And then we've already talked about it a bunch, but the life cycle of software. So with that, Zim, you want to add the challenges with?
My personal opinion. We'll see what the engineering team has to say, but it's fielding and sustaining an autonomous vehicle. We've never done it before. There's just so many questions. So when you talk about DOTMLPF-P, what is that going to look like? We don't know yet. What does maintenance look like for an attritable vehicle? We don't know yet, right? Like, these are things that we're trying to answer as we're building it. And there's no playbook that's been written, right? Like, the Air Force knows how to develop, procure, and field command fighters, right? Like, got that in the bag. Like, this is just completely different. So I think there's just so much discovery that needs to happen in a record-breaking speed. So I think all of that combined together it's going to be challenging for everybody.
And then I'll just add the culture of the Air Force, right? Getting fighter pilots to accept the dependency or integration of an unmanned thing. I mean, unmanned has not been sexy for Air Combat Command for the last 20 years. And, how does that balance cultural? I think that's something to be seen. How does it really integrate in the force structure from a market acceptance standpoint?
There's a lot of really good examples about that. The one that always stands out to me is the F-16 and auto GCAS. So basically what happens if F-16 pulls a lot of Gs, you can black out the pilot, single seat, he blacks out. What happens? Plane crashes and pilot's lost. That technology to save pilots had existed for over 20 years, and they never fielded it because there was this huge aversion until there wasn't. And then they fielded it and like, oh, after it saved the first person, everyone's like, what? This airplane will right itself and fly back up if their pilot's unconscious. And now an F-16 will not fly if that system does not work. Like, so the pendulum of the trust and accepting that technology. And the irony is, all the F-16 guys out there know this very well. That airplane would not fly without a computer anyways, all right? It's all digital flight controls. So the fact that the computer is making that airplane even fly in the first place, I think people skip over that fact.
And also, Navy has not implemented auto GCAS. So from a cultural obstacle perspective, there's still ways to go.
Yeah, that's true. But one of the things that they have implemented was Magic Carpet. So it has the auto land in the carrier. And again, something that, cats and traps are like numbers that naval aviators cherish. How many times have they landed on an aircraft carrier?
Yeah, and just if you look up, that picture up there is me with a Super Hornet doing a Magic Carpet test.
See
that in the background up there, me in my flight jacket? Yeah. Way to call that out. You just knew that from seeing it.
Awesome. For those who aren't tracking, this software basically it automates the landing sequence. So once you get on glide slope, it basically does auto throttle and glide slope management, so you can catch the right wire pretty much every time. So it makes it 1,000 times easier to land on the carrier. That actually got embraced. I mean, Mike, you were there. You tell us.
I mean, I was part of UClass and MQ-25. And so we were out there understanding how Magic Carpet needed to be implemented for an autonomous air vehicle. Like, how much of that system could be used? What were the human element? Where was there trust and where was there not trust? That was a whole flight test out on the USS Stennis that we were doing with Buddy Denham at NavAir. So fun time in my career to get to go hang out with a bunch of fighter pilots and play Top Gun. So yeah, memorable moment.
Earlier on, we said, the superpowers of the companies, one of them was that you're both privately held. When we talk about scale and affordability, the other thing that both companies have, I think, they specialize in is composites. So composite manufacturing. So not bending metal, but laying down carbon fiber, fiberglass, things like that. Does that play a role in how you're thinking about rapid production, scale, and maintaining affordability?
Yes and no. I mean, composites are inherently expensive. They're really for high performance applications where you need certain strength and stiffness. I think when you look at collaborative combat aircraft and the amount of heterogeneity in it, like how adaptable it would be, we're actually falling back on more metallic, what we call hybrid structures, metal frames with composite skins. I think there are automated tape laying where you can have a big fancy robot arm put down your carbon fiber in a tool. So there are specific applications like wing structures where it buys its way on. But because this is more of a pickup truck than it is an F1 car, you're going to see more kind of capable structures that are more ready for changes in the design. And I think you're actually going to see more metallics in these aircraft than you would have traditionally seen on some of the legacy UAV products that the DoD has. So composites are a piece, but I wouldn't say they're an enabling technology on what CCA needs.
Other things to consider on the composite side, and having an in-house composite shop hugely beneficial from kind of schedule and kind of capability and understanding technology perspective. But some of the challenges for this program is going to be scaled production at low cost. And so that injects kind of different parameters or constraints when you think about what the designs need to be and also how you're going to actually produce these at rate. So kind of different take on how we're going to do this if we were to get to production.
I would imagine both, you're winning. You wouldn't have a winning proposal if you hadn't already considered the ability to scale production. So facilities, ability to on-ramp people and build out the not just floor space, but the tooling and stuff like that too. So all part of your strategy to speed the ramp and field these things, right?
For General Atomics, it's somewhat straightforward. Here in San Diego, we have one of the national assets that's been built for 30 years, which is this giant production facility that builds unmanned airplanes. It's about 4 million square feet of space here. And so with the drawdown in MQ-9 Reaper and the role that it plays for the combatant commands, we have basically a hot production line where I can take an MQ-9 Reaper out and put a collaborative combat aircraft in. So that allows us to reach extreme rate production and scale very early in the process. And, you brought up, the privately held and being able to forecast, we were able to essentially take Reaper parts out of stock rooms and build the first aircraft. I mean, the first CCA is in assembly right now as we speak in a building.
Oh,
so,
wow.
the speed at which you get contract award and it's announced to the speed of them getting an airplane is well inside 24 months, if not inside 1 year. And I think only a privately backed company could take those kind of fiscal upfront risks to have that kind of inventory on hand, pre-build the iPhone for when you walk in the store and buy it. If you had to wait to pay Apple to build your iPhone, you would wait 12 months for it to be, machined out and assembled in China. So I think part of the reason you see Anduril and GA here is our ability to quickly bring our financial equities to bear to provide that kind of ready upfront inventory of components.
Yeah, I think the only way you hit timeline and schedule is if you make these investments and you take some early risks to stand up a lot of these manufacturing capabilities. We've done it for a lot of our other programs already. So whether that's Dive or Altius or some other programs we've got going. So it's kind of just a continuation of that, right? But if you want to produce anything at scale very quickly, yeah, the facility needs to be up and running well before you get any kind of feedback or decision point from the government. So
Let's talk about the future real quick. Probably a good way to end. So like today we're talking about what's going to be in the next few years. So let's fast forward a few years from now. What do you think we'll be sitting around talking about a few years from then? Like, what does that future trajectory look like?
I think it kind of looks like that thing right there, if I could point to it. There is a next generation of UAS that is under work that is much, much more survivable, much more autonomous, much more cognitive. It lives inside the DARPA Longshot program, which I just pointed to. It lives inside some stuff that Anduril's working on in the restricted space. There's a next generation out there. Unfortunately, we can't talk too much turkey on it. But it's essentially taking all the principles that we've talked about today to, I think, an extreme. Affordability, survivability, and cognitive autonomy. And it's exciting. I think you kind of see this military Internet of Things with all these different role players in these attrition-tolerant vehicles layering together into this very ballet orchestrated kill web. And I think a lot of fanfare has been given to seafloor, and a lot of fanfare has been given to the space layer, specifically the LEO layer. But at the end of the day, those cannot deliver kinetic and non-kinetic effects the way the air domain does. And that's why the Air Force is one of the pillars of our DoD. So I think you're going to see the air domain make a comeback. I think space is not going to be this protected safe haven that everyone thinks it's going to be. And the seafloor is not going to be time responsive to the level that we need. Submarines go relatively slow. They don't go, Mach 1. And you're going to see some really cool cognitive autonomy with very high levels of survivability, closing some very cool kill webs.
Zim?
I tend to be such a pessimist on this stuff. Where would I like to see the department versus where I actually think they'll actually be? I mean, I think even if you have 3 to 5 new programs that are somehow embracing autonomous vehicles in any domain, right? Like, we should consider that a win. If we see programs that are standing up and trying to field in 5 years instead of 10, we should see that as a win. I don't think we're going to darken the skies with robots in the next 5 years, but I think if we can just start accelerating some of the change and adoption of these things, that will be great. And I don't think it needs to just be ACPs. I think you can have autonomous applications of so many different things, whether it's space or mission systems, on the ground or surface or undersea domains. Like, there's so many different areas you can go with this stuff, and it's really just getting the momentum within the department.
Nice. Closing thoughts, Mike?
I feel very fortunate to have a company that has the agility that we have, and then the pedigree to build that agility from. I think, Frank Kendall has spurred on an acquisition philosophy that allows company to take that agility and that pedigree and do something very special with it. I feel more connected to the warfighter, more connected to Air Combat Command than I ever have in, my 2-decade career of doing this. And I really feel that we're going to get something meaningful out to the warfighters, within this 2-year time horizon that we're beating the drum to. So very fortunate for the Air Force giving me the chance to show what we can do. Excited to kind of meet Anduril on the flight line and see the differences between our products and how they complement or compete. Very much enjoying the state of the union in the Department of Defense right now, which is, I can't always say that. It's a good time to be in the aerospace game.
Completely concur. It's exciting. It's an exciting program. It's exciting times. I think things are different and feels more hopeful. And I know for our team, it's just heads down and build fury and get to first flight, and let's do this thing, right?
Let's do it. All right, well, Zim and Mike, thank you for joining today on the Merge. The next few years are gonna be awesome to see play out, and like I said, I can't wait to see the day where you go to the flight line and you got both of them sitting side by side, compare and contrast how they complement and compete. It's gonna be exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. But until then, that's the show, and we'll see ya.